It was supposed to be another quiet night, the kind of shift where the hallways echoed only with the squeak of my mop and the hum of vending machines. I had just finished locking up one wing of the school when the lights cut out without warning. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my chest. A moment later, a faint alarm started from the stairwell. My first thought was that a kid had pulled something by accident, but when I pushed open the heavy door, I found her. She was sitting on the landing between floors, her briefcase spilled open, papers scattered like fallen leaves. One heel had snapped clean off, and in the dim emergency glow, I could see her struggling to breathe, clutching at her ankle. The flashlight on my belt cut through the shadows, and when the beam landed on her face, she looked up at me, wide-eyed, shaken, but trying to hide it. I knelt down, more out of instinct than thought. "You all right?" I asked, my voice too loud in that narrow space. She nodded quickly, too quickly, as if she was more afraid of looking weak than of the dark around us. I gave her my jacket, the one that always smelled faintly of chalk dust and cleaning fluid, and steadied her to her feet. For a moment we just stood there, listening to the creak of the building in the blackout, waiting for the generators to wake up. When the lights finally flickered back, she pressed my flashlight back into my hand like it was something precious. She asked my name. I gave her just the first. Habit, pride, maybe both. She smiled like that answer was enough. Then she gathered her papers, slipped off her broken shoe, and limped down the stairs without another word. By the time I followed her out into the night air, she was gone. No car waiting, no sound of footsteps, nothing but the faint smell of rain on the pavement. I told myself she was just a stranger I'd never see again. But the next morning, when my daughter walked into her classroom and found a brand new box of coloured pencils sitting on her desk, I knew I was wrong. Morning came the way it always did in our little apartment above the laundromat, with the rattle of old pipes and the smell of detergent seeping through the floor. I shook the sleep from my eyes, made coffee that tasted like burnt hope, and tried to get my daughter ready for school. Emily was 10, sharp as a tack, and far too aware of how hard I worked just to keep the lights on. She never complained, not about the hand-me-down clothes or the frozen dinners. What she wanted most was paper and something to draw with. Her mother used to say that Emily was born with a pencil in her hand. Even now, years after we lost her, I could still see the same spark when Emily bent over a scrap of notebook paper, sketching whole worlds out of nothing. She didn't have the fancy markers the other kids showed off, so she made do with stubs of chalk I swiped from the school supply closet on my night shift. She'd sit at the table, dust coating her small hands, grinning like those broken pieces were treasure. That morning, though, she walked into class and found something waiting. A brand new box of coloured pencils, not the cheap kind that break when you press too hard, but the smooth, professional ones that glide across paper. Her teacher said it must have been donated to the art programme, maybe a leftover from some grant. Emily ran her fingers across the box like it was magic, like the world had finally noticed her. When she came home that afternoon, she couldn't stop talking. "Dad, look at the colours. There's even silver and gold. Do you think they meant it for me?" I watched her eyes shine, brighter than I'd seen in a long time, and for once, I didn't have the heart to question it. I just smiled and told her to use every colour until the pencils were too small to hold. But later that night, as she filled page after page with drawings that looked alive in ways I couldn't explain, I kept thinking about the woman in the stairwell, about how she'd vanished into the dark without leaving a name. And when I noticed a slip of paper taped under the pencil box with a single line of handwriting, I knew this wasn't just coincidence. The slip of paper was small, almost an afterthought, folded once and tucked under the box. I would have missed it if Emily hadn't torn the packaging open so quickly. The handwriting was neat, steady, and it said only one thing: "For the girl who still smiles with chalk on her hands." I read it twice, then a third time, my stomach tightening with each pass. It wasn't something a random donor would know. That line came straight from my kitchen table, from nights when Emily pressed broken chalk into drawings as if she could hold the world together with colour. Someone had seen her, Someone had been close enough to notice. Emily, of course, didn't see it that way. She hugged the note to her chest like it was a secret message meant only for her. That night she drew until her fingers cramped, filling page after page with bright skies and wide fields, the kind of pictures only a child could imagine. For the first time in months, she laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. I wanted to hold on to that sound forever. But long after she'd gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the note under the dim bulb, questions circling my head. Who would know about her chalk? Why us? Why now? The memory of the stairwell came back sharp. The stranger's pale face in the dark, the way she clutched her briefcase, the way she asked for my name but gave nothing in return. The next morning, Emily's teacher stopped me in the hallway after drop-off. She lowered her voice, almost conspiratorial, and handed me an envelope. "This came through the school office for Emily," she whispered. My hands went cold before I even tore it open. Inside was another note, this one longer, more official looking. It was a letter about an art scholarship already approved with Emily's name printed across the top, and at the bottom, instead of a signature, were just two letters, A and M. When I first read the letter, I wanted to believe it was some kind of clerical mistake. Scholarships didn't just fall from the sky onto kids from families like ours. There was always a form to fill out, an interview, a waiting list a mile long. But this letter had Emily's name printed clear as day, the details typed neatly, and at the bottom those same two letters, A and M. Emily danced around the kitchen when I showed her. "Dad, they picked me! I didn't even apply, and they still picked me." Her excitement was a kind of music, the kind I hadn't heard since her mum was alive. But behind her joy, I felt something else pressing in, the weight of someone watching over us, making choices without asking. That night, when Emily was asleep, I sat with the letter in my hands. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to tell her it was a mistake, to keep her safe from whatever strings might be attached. My pride whispered that we didn't need charity, that I could work extra hours, sell the old truck, make ends meet like I always had. But another voice cut through, quieter but sharper. What if this was the chance she deserved? What if my pride was the only thing standing in her way? The days that followed made it harder to ignore. New sketchbooks showed up in her backpack, extras the art teacher swore had come from donations. Her drawings grew bolder, more detailed, like she'd finally been given permission to dream bigger. And every time I looked at her face, bright with colours I couldn't afford, the knot in my chest pulled tighter. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. At the next parent-teacher night, I lingered after the crowd had thinned. Emily's teacher, a kind woman with tired eyes, leaned across the desk and lowered her voice. "There's something you should know," she said. She slid a second envelope toward me, thinner than the first, but sealed tight. I turned it over in my hands, my thumb tracing the flap. The return address was from a community foundation in the city, not the school. My pulse quickened. I looked up at her, but she only shook her head as if to say she knew nothing more. When I finally tore it open, there was just a single line inside. "Opportunities don't wait forever. Let her take this one." And again, at the bottom, those same two letters, A and M. I must have read that line a dozen times under the dim light of our kitchen, the words circling in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. Opportunities don't wait forever. It wasn't just advice. It felt personal, like the writer knew me, knew the way I'd been hesitating, second-guessing, letting pride keep me rooted in place. And at the bottom, the same two letters, A and M. Whoever they weren't going away. The next morning, Emily was already at the table, sketching with a focus that made the rest of the world disappear. She didn't notice me watching. She didn't see the way her shoulders relaxed when she drew, or how the shadows she shaded in seemed lighter than the ones we carried at home. For her, the pencils and new paper weren't charity. They were freedom, and I couldn't bring myself to take that away. Later that week, a box arrived on our porch, heavy enough to make me bend my knees when I lifted it. Inside were more supplies, brushes, paints, even a canvas bigger than our kitchen table. But what froze me wasn't the art set, it was the packing slip tucked between the bubble wrap. At the bottom, in faded ink, were 2 words: account reference, Stairwell. My throat went dry. There was only one stairwell that made sense. Only one night that word could be pointing to. The blackout, the woman I had pulled out of the dark. I sat down hard on the step, the box open at my feet, the slip trembling in my hand. She hadn't just disappeared. She had been here all along, circling our lives, leaving gifts like breadcrumbs, and she had chosen to stay invisible. That night, as Emily showed me the canvas with wide eyes, asking if she could paint a tree as tall as the one outside our window, I forced a smile. But inside, my chest burned with questions I couldn't answer. Why us? Why her? Why now? And most of all, how much longer before she stepped out of the shadows and revealed herself? For nights I kept the packing slip folded in my back pocket, the word stairwell burning a hole through the paper. It was too precise to be coincidence. I couldn't stop replaying that blackout in my head. The broken heel, the scattered papers, the way she looked at me like I was the only solid thing left in the dark. Whoever was behind the gifts had to be her. I told myself to leave it alone. Work, bills, Emily's laughter with her new paints, that should have been enough. But curiosity has a way of wearing a man down. And it wasn't just curiosity, it was unease. Whoever she was, she had reached straight into my daughter's life without ever asking. One evening, as I was clearing the kitchen table, an envelope slipped from between the new sketchbooks. It wasn't addressed to Emily this time, it was to me. Inside was a short thank you letter from a community foundation, typed neat and formal, acknowledging ongoing participation in the arts support programme. At the bottom was a logo and an address downtown. I stared at that letter a long while. My name didn't belong on it, yet there it was, as if someone had quietly filled out paperwork in my place. That was the crack I needed, not chance, but a trail. The next day, after dropping Emily at school, I took the bus across town. The foundation's building stood taller than I expected, glass windows reflecting the winter sun, polished floors echoing under my worn work boots. I felt out of place the second I stepped inside, but I asked to see the lobby displays. No one questioned me. I guess I looked like another parent trying to understand where the money came from. And there it was. A wall lined with photos of donors and sponsors, smiling faces, handshakes with city leaders, plaques of recognition. My eyes skimmed until they froze on one image. Her, the woman from the stairwell. No jacket, no panic in her eyes this time. Just calm confidence in a tailored dress, standing beside a painting that probably cost more than my house. Beneath the photo, a name etched in neat gold letters, Alexandra Morgan, founding donor. The room tilted for a moment, and I had to steady myself against the polished frame. Every gift, every note, every envelope with 2 letters at the bottom, A and M. It had been her all along. That night I didn't tell Emily. She was on the couch with her sketchbook, colouring a family beneath a wide oak tree. Her voice was light as she asked me what shade of green looked closest to spring. I answered, forcing my voice steady, though my thoughts spun. Now I knew her name, but not her reason, and that question was heavier than all the rest. Winter had settled deep into the city, the kind of cold that crept through cracked windows, no matter how many blankets you piled on. Emily had been quieter than usual, her sketches slower, her colours darker. I told myself it was just the season, that kids hibernate in their own way when the days get short. But one morning, as she sat at the table with her pencils spread out, her hand froze mid-line. Her face went pale, and the pencil rolled out of her grip. "Emily?" My chair scraped back as I rushed to her. She swayed, her eyes glassy, before she collapsed against me. Panic ripped through me as I scooped her into my arms, shouting for a neighbour to call an ambulance. The ride to the hospital blurred into sirens and fluorescent lights, my mind repeating the same thought over and over. Don't take her too. Doctors crowded her bed, their words clinical but heavy. A congenital heart defect, they called it. Something hidden since birth, waiting like a shadow. They spoke of surgery, of urgency, of costs that stacked higher than I could even picture. My insurance barely scratched the surface. I tried to keep my head up, to nod as they explained options, but inside I was breaking. That night I sat in the waiting room, hands trembling, numbers swirling uselessly in my mind. How many cars would I have to fix? How many nights would I have to work to buy my little girl another tomorrow? The answer was brutal. I couldn't. I buried my face in my hands, the walls closing in, until a nurse approached with a clipboard. "There's been a development," she said softly. My chest tightened as I braced for the worst, but instead she handed me a folder. "An anonymous donor has arranged to cover all medical expenses, full surgery, immediate approval." I stared at her, words lodged in my throat. Inside the folder, stamped across the top page, were those same 2 letters I had come to dread and expect all at once, A and M. The words on the page blurred as I stared at them, my chest hollow. Anonymous donor, full coverage, immediate approval. I didn't need the initials to know who it was. Alexandra Morgan. The woman from the stairwell, the ghost behind every package, every note, every gift that had crept into our lives. I should have felt relief, gratitude. Instead, a storm rose inside me, tangled with shame. Because it meant that I couldn't save my own daughter without her. That all my long nights, all my stubborn pride, had led me here. Hands tied, waiting for a stranger to rescue us again. I was still choking on those thoughts when I looked up and saw her. She was standing in the doorway of the waiting room, not in a tailored dress or hidden behind a name scrawled on an envelope, but in plain clothes, the kind you'd wear to blend in anywhere. And yet she carried herself with the kind of quiet certainty that filled the space around her. "I didn't want to wait," she said softly, stepping closer. Her eyes flicked toward the window where Emily lay in a bed surrounded by machines. "How is she?" My mouth was dry. "You tell me," I muttered, sharper than I meant. "Seems like you've known everything else." She didn't flinch. Instead, she lowered herself into the chair beside me, her voice steady but laced with something fragile. "Ben, this isn't about me, it's about her, let me help." I wanted to tell her to leave, to take her money and her secrets, and go back to her world of polished floors and glass towers. But then I looked through the window again, at Emily's small body tangled in wires, her chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm. My pride shriveled against that sight. "She's all I have," I whispered, my voice breaking in a way I hadn't let it in years. Alexandra's eyes softened. "And that's why she deserves every chance. Please, let me do this." The words hung between us, heavy and unyielding. For the first time since that night in the stairwell, I realised I couldn't run from her anymore, not when my daughter's life was balanced on the edge of her generosity. The doors to the operating wing opened then, a doctor calling my name. I stood on shaky legs, my heart pounding. Behind me, Alexandra rose too, and as we followed the doctor down the hallway side by side, I knew there was no turning back. The hours in that waiting room stretched like years. I wore grooves into the tile with my pacing, my hands raw from rubbing together. Every time the doors swung open, my breath caught. And then, finally, the surgeon came out. His face was calm. "She's through the worst of it. The surgery went well." My knees nearly buckled with relief. When they wheeled Emily past us, pale but alive, I wanted to reach out and hold her, to keep her tethered to me. Instead, I trailed behind, my eyes wet, my chest hollowed out and full all at once. Alexandra walked a step behind me, her silence steady, like she knew this wasn't her moment to speak. Over the next days she was there. Every morning when I arrived, she was already by Emily's bed reading to her or handing her sketchbooks. She didn't bring extravagant gifts, just paper, pencils, things that let Emily keep her spirit alive even in the sterile hospital air. And every night, when visiting hours ended, she slipped away quietly, without asking for thanks. But I couldn't stay silent forever. One evening, after Emily had drifted off, I stepped into the hallway where Alexandra sat with a paper cup of hospital coffee. "Why us?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "Why me? You could have chosen anyone, but you keep circling back here. Why?" She set the cup down, her hands trembling just slightly. "Because you saved me when you didn't have to. Because you looked at me and didn't see money or headlines or power. You saw a person. That night, when the world went dark, you reminded me there was still something real left. I couldn't let that go. I wanted to be angry, to tell her that sneaking into our lives through donations and notes wasn't fair. But the truth in her voice stopped me cold. For once, there was no disguise, no hidden script, just honesty. I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed, my pride still clawing at me. And what happens now, when she's healed, when the hospital fades into memory? Do you disappear again? Or do we wake up every day wondering if you'll show up with another envelope? Her eyes held mine, unflinching. That depends on whether you'll let me stay, not as a donor, not as a saviour, but as someone who chooses to be here, with both of you. Before I could answer, Emily stirred inside the room, her small voice calling for me. I turned back toward the door, my chest heavy with a choice I wasn't ready to make. Emily's strength returned one small step at a time. The first time she laughed at my clumsy joke, the first time she asked for her sketchbook, the first time she stood on her own without wobbling. Each moment felt like a sunrise after a long storm. And through it all, Alexandra was there. Not as some benefactor from the shadows, not with headlines or fanfare, but simply as a steady presence. She learned how Emily liked her apples sliced, how she always started drawings with a tree, how she fell asleep faster if someone hummed by her side. One afternoon, while I was fumbling with the discharge papers, Emily handed me a new drawing. 3 figures stood under a wide oak tree. They weren't holding hands, not bound together, but joined by fine lines so faint you almost had to squint to see them. Invisible threads, binding them in quiet ways. "It's us," she said softly. Her words landed heavier than any explanation I could have asked for. Pride, anger, fear, all of it dissolved in the face of what my daughter saw so clearly. She didn't need names for it. She didn't care what label the world would give us. She only knew we were connected. That night, after Emily drifted to sleep in her own bed for the first time in weeks, I sat at the kitchen table across from Alexandra. The silence wasn't tense anymore. It was honest. I looked at her and said, "I don't know what this is supposed to be. Family, friendship, something else. But maybe we don't have to call it anything. If you keep choosing to be here, and I keep choosing the same, maybe that's enough." She smiled then. Not the polished kind from a plaque on a wall, but a tired, real smile. "Enough," she echoed. Months later, life found a new rhythm. I worked my shifts, Emily filled sketchbooks, and Alexandra kept her promises in the quiet ways that mattered most. Sometimes she stayed a weekend, sometimes just an evening. We never tried to define it. We just kept showing up for each other, and that was more real than any label could ever be. Looking back, I realized the hardest lesson wasn't about survival or even about love. It was learning that strength doesn't always mean standing alone. Sometimes it means letting the people who care find their place beside you. So let me ask you, if life gave you a connection that didn't fit neatly into a box, would you risk letting pride push it away, or would you be brave enough to accept it exactly as it is?